Welcome to the latest edition of The Extra Edge. Now, when I met up with my colleague Tim Wiggum and today's guest to discuss our topic of conversation today, my first question was one which I was kind of worried sounded a little bit daft, but apparently, and to my great relief, it was in fact about as pertinent a question as you could get. So bearing that in mind and giving myself as much glory as possible, I will share that question with you in a moment, and it will be a good introduction into the session. But first of all, let's say hello to today's guest. Dr. Jared Dempsey is a chartered psychologist who has spent the last 20 years researching, teaching and training in the area of human behaviour in the workplace. He spent a lot of time offshore developing safety and organisational cultures, and it's this combined academic and oilfield background which provides a unique understanding of how human factors can be embedded in offshore environments and more widely across the energy sector. In other words, he's the ideal person for Exceed as a well management and performance improvement expert to be chatting with today. So, to get back to my question, it was this. This podcast series focuses on performance improvement based on a whole range of cultures and attitudes, and taking a look at what makes teams and individuals tick and therefore perform in a certain way at work, in our case within the energy industry. And to my untrained ear, that's exactly what human factors sounds like, identifying human factors and the impact that they can have in the offshore environment. So I may be daft, but gentlemen, I need you to explain the difference to me and hopefully to our audience as well, and put me right. What is the difference? Jared, I think we'll let you go first.
Okay. Obviously, when we talk about something as wide-ranging as human factors, we're only really given our opinion. But I'll give my opinion as best as I can. Performance improvement and performance optimization has its grounding in the work of Deming and quality management. So if we go back, we look at things like after action reviews, lessons learned. How do we actually identify things that have went wrong, and how do we put them right? So a lot of the times we talk about the performance cycle, plan, do, check, act, plans, do, study, act, all of those types of things, and they're all important, but I wouldn't say they're directly human factors. They're a subset of human factors. If we were going to talk more formally about human factors, then you'd actually start to talk about things like ergonomics. So ergonomics is, we can describe that as how we interact with our environment with regards to physiology and machinery. Some people will take a wider view of ergonomics and would actually talk about how we think, so the cognitive processes that go on. And for me, that's what I would call human factors, and that's a lot to do with the cognitive processes of what's going on. So if we were talking about performance improvement, performance optimization, we would talk about things like leadership, we would talk about those improvement cycles, but we wouldn't necessarily drill right down and talk about things like situation awareness. We wouldn't necessarily talk about memory. We wouldn't necessarily talk about kind of things like biases. And so there's a whole area of kind of like psychology, and if you're going to take a wider view of human factors physiology, that performance optimization doesn't necessarily deal with on a regular basis. So that's how I would explain it.
Okay, well, that does actually make sense to me perfectly. So thank you, number one. Tim, I guess from a performance improvement specialist point of view, where then do you, or is that something that you ever address and want to bring to the fore? No, do you get so far and do the work that you do and then think, right, really actually I've identified that we need to drill down, as Jared says, a little bit deeper, and there's maybe some other elements at play here that need a bit of expert advice on?
It's an area that I'm hugely passionate about and fascinated in. I'm certainly not a psychologist, so when I get to meet and work with the likes of Jared, I just, I love the insights and hearing a little bit more about the science and some of the data and some of the learning and study that the likes of Jared have done. My area of interest has always been human performance. So human factors, there's definitely an overlap, a significant overlap between Jared's expertise in human factors and my experience and perhaps growing expertise in human performance. Specifically, what I've been interested in over the last 15 years has been how to accelerate the team building and learning curve for upstream campaign teams in the energy sector. And these are teams or leaders and teams who often get together with a fairly short timeline before executing the project. And I've been interested in understanding what works to accelerate that team building and learning curve, what activities, what behaviors, what conversations, what language, and based on the feedback that we get before, during, and after these campaigns, I've been more formally researching actually on my own journey in the last 5 years, what the trends are, what the patterns are, what can be repeated with another team to accelerate that learning curve. You know, when Jared and I have interacted on a few articles and interviews and webinars over the last year, what I'm always interested in is the performance climate that leaders create for their teams. I like to call it mood or mood set, because for me, everyone's aware of the concept of mindset, but mood set, in my opinion, and based on the feedback I've had from others' opinion, is as important as mindset. So creating the conditions for your team to flourish, for the team to unlock their true capability and potential is critical for performance. I think we all intuitively know that, but we haven't necessarily been able to label or use the right language for that to really help leaders understand the level of interest and effort they should put into the mood set or the climate for the team. And one of the epiphanies I had whilst researching the literature and reviewing the literature around performance improvement was a guy called Sir John Whitmore, who wrote a book called Coaching for Performance. And he came up with a theory, or he proposed a theory that performance equals potential minus interference. And when I was listening to Jared earlier, and based on conversations we've had in the past, when leaders understand how to set their teams up for success and then are able to step back with confidence because they trust the team to deliver on their own, and they step back and don't interfere or micromanage, as we sometimes call it, often that's when teams can really unlock their true effectiveness and capability. Now, obviously, there are times when interference is necessary and needed, and that's perhaps something we can talk about in due course.
Well, something you're talking there about, trying to step away from micromanagement, and something that I think I'd read from a previous conversation you guys had was that research kind of shows that if you allow people to see themselves as something, whether that's particularly good at this or an expert in that, which is basically what happens, I guess, when you move away from micromanagement, you give people a bit of control of their own identity, that they're much more likely to be consistent with that self-identity, that self-image. Is that something, I just, when I read that, I thought that's really interesting, because it's right. If you think, yes, I am a good such and such, you do tend to excel. That kind of self-confidence helps. So is that something that you've both witnessed in the offshore environment before, that gives somebody a bit of self-belief and it can really have an impact on their performance? Jared?
I would say very much so, particularly if you go somewhere where they're struggling. Wherever you go, in general, you're going to find people who are dedicated and hardworking. Now, if it's a toxic environment and that can be a legacy thing inherited by even leaders that have now moved on. Then you can find those behaviours are skewed and they're not what you would want them to be. But when I've went to places where they've been struggling, one of the first things I try to do is to help them see themselves as they really are, or as they really should be, and reframe themselves. You know, if you can lift up their heads, if you can help them self-identify as a winning team and help them to be recognized as such by the wider organization, people seem to, it's almost like the mantle of leadership when it falls to someone, when people, will rise to the occasion. And we find that across the board. So if we're talking about organizational culture, or certainly safety culture, but if we go back and even look at individuals, it's when someone actually starts to see themselves as a non-smoker, when someone starts to see themselves as a runner, when someone starts to see themselves as something, that belief is either going to be debilitating or it's going to be empowering. So it's one of the first things that I look at whenever I go into an organization or a small subset of an organization, is how does the team see itself?
And does that, if you, for example, Tim, were going in a team that had that benefit of that nurturing, that education, does that make your life easier when you're going in from a performance perspective? Can you automatically pretty much tell when that has happened, when there is that mindset in a team?
Yeah, identity is so important, isn't it? And one of the first, in fact, the first spoke we have in our 12-step performance wheel when it comes to the offshore execute team is induction and identity. We put a huge amount of stock on the importance of a team unifying and establishing an identity. And we actually have run a fun challenge where we ask people to suggest a name for the campaign, from which we can get a graphic designer to create a logo which represents that campaign team, individually and uniquely, as distinct from their various coveralls and badges. So identity from a team perspective is important. I think purpose ties into this as well, a real true sense of purpose. And one of the best stories I like when it comes to purpose is, after John F. Kennedy had said we need to put a man on the moon, United States, before the end of the 1960s. And then he visited NASA and he came across the cleaner and he asked him what he was doing. And the cleaner said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." And it's that great story which highlights the importance of uniting behind a common purpose, having an identity where everyone is pulling in the same direction. So irrespective of what your role might be on an oil rig in the North Sea, for example, you're contributing to the production of more energy for the United Kingdom, for example. So identity is very closely linked to purpose, and I'm talking more from a team perspective because, of course, that's my passion, is building successful teams and helping leaders to do that. To tie in with what Jared was saying, individual identity and individual self-belief is absolutely core to successful performance. I think we all intuitively know that. So what contributes to self-identity, self-confidence, self-belief? Well, I think if you consider a work environment, it's critical that the leaders create a safe space for people to be vulnerable, for people to be reflective, for people to try and potentially fall over and then get up again. And I deliberately say fall rather than fail, because fail has the wrong connotations. Whereas, if we allow, just like when the child's learning to ride a bike, we allow the child to fall over, get back on, and keep trying until they master cycling the bike. In the same way, individuals within a team environment need to be given some permission to fall over, learn the lesson, get back up, and continually improve. And if that is allowed and the conditions are created for that to happen by the leader, the individuals within that project team will be more inclined to try new stuff, to play, to create, and to build their own self-belief and self-confidence and self-identity, because they feel like a contributing team member. They feel like their strengths are respected and validated. And of course, the opposite, which might be an interesting conversation, is, you know, those environments which are built on fear, they're built on micromanagement, they're built on an environment where individuals are not really allowed to express themselves or to try new things. And we've seen what can happen there, where individuals clam up, they actually lose their self-confidence and their self-belief. And so they wait to be told what to do, because they daren't take the initiative, try new stuff, because they're scared of being fired or being admonished. So we've got we've probably all had the experience of the compare and contrast, what works, what doesn't, and what contributes to self-belief, self-identity, what helps it grow versus what prevents it from growing. So those are some of my thoughts on that concept.
So returning back to what we were talking about a wee minute ago, which was about mood and that kind of creating a climate in which people perform one way or another. And I'm kind of thinking about the past year being an ultimate mood changer, but in a more general sense, how much can one event, how quickly can that mood shift in either a good way or a bad way? I mean, is it something that can be that precarious that it can change very, very quickly?
I think if you have a very strong culture, then you are allowed a couple of wobbles, but only a couple. If your culture has just been recently developed or built, then you can actually sometimes be allowed only one. I'll give you a bit of an example, and I would refer to these as threshold moments. I'd been on a rig a few years ago. We'd managed to get the rig to a place where its safety culture, I would say, was really good. Unfortunately, there was an incident. It was a minor incident, but the way that it was classified by the rig manager was perceived by the crew members to be downplayed and kind of like downgraded. And the comments to me were, well, we told you that they say this, but they believe that a lot of this is superficial. So that did profound damage to the culture that we were trying to build. But on the flip side, you can also have threshold moments that can really turn a place around in a positive manner. So let's say you've got a plant offline, you've got an engineer who's working to get the plant back online, and he's worked for 12 hours, then he's worked for 14, and according to the control of work at that point, he needs to stop. He's the only person who can get that plant back up online. And then management takes the decision, okay, we're going to do what's right and we will stop the job. Now, once you have, particularly if you have one strong example like that, then people will start believing, and that again has a profound positive influence on the culture. And you have a few episodes like that, and it really dramatically takes your culture to where it wants to be. So yeah, there are these moments that can be pivotal in either kind of like a downward spiral or kind of like an upward spiral, if you like.
Mm-hmm. I guess from what you're saying there is that it can very much fall to an individual as much as a company-wide mindset.
I think it comes back to, Tim speaks about mood. The whole organization needs to be bought into something like that. You need someone to be able to feel comfortable to say, actually, I'm fatigued. I need to stop. Actually, the rules are. But people will only say that if they feel as if they're going to be supported by their peers, their colleagues, their immediate line manager, and ultimately the people who are maybe 200 miles away working in an office. So it really does take everybody. And so we talk about climate then, and then we're back to mood, and we're back to psychological safety. Okay,
so you've kind of mentioned two quite specific incidences there. What about more general 2020 COVID-19 everybody completely shifting what they do and how they do it. How has that, you've obviously been working throughout this period. What are have you seen particular trends in behaviour over that time that are quite easy to identify, or is it different everywhere you go?
Oh, well, it's, I mean, COVID's just been a massive social experiment, really. Not to downplay the suffering, but from day one, there were so many lessons that you could take away from COVID. But, I go back to the very early days when the Houses of Parliament was jam-packed. It was like sardines in a can, and they were telling everybody to socially distance. No, well, that's not going to work. You can't do one thing and say another. It was classic. I think also if you go into organizations and they were kind of playing at their COVID controls, they weren't really they were managing it because they had to kind of keep legislators happy or to kind of keep going, but they didn't really care about their people. And I think that those organizations will suffer, and they'll see the backlash, because what we're probably going to see now, in my estimation, is a 2 to 3 year boom of the economy and things ramp up. As that happens, it's going to be a job hunter's market. So people will be able to leave those employers who didn't treat them well in the past. And there really wasn't much foresight of some people. But I think what's probably, again, you get to that whole thing of your immediate line manager and the organization. I think where you've had a thoughtful line manager who's kept in contact with you, if you've been working from home, who's been flexible, if you've got children that you've had to help do schoolwork, if it's been a great opportunity to show a bit of humanity and to treat your work as well. And if you've done that, then you're going to reap the rewards. And then obviously there's a whole the whole flexible working from home thing, and we're seeing this divisive opinion now of we need to get everybody back into the office full time. We think it's better, or and then you've got some large organisations which are saying actually we think that you should be at home for a couple of days a week. I know you're seeing the vested opinions as well of those people who rent out city spaces, conducting studies, say, or office spaces, saying, yeah, people should be back in the office, unsurprisingly. So, but I think and I hope that we have changed the structure of work and that people do have that more flexibility. Sometimes it's just not necessary to be commuting, losing that time. As long as we basically keep to that psychological contract that we have with our employers and our employers have with us, that it really is beneficial to everybody to have a certain degree of flexibility.
Do you think that's, I know so many of the people that you deal with, Tim, are going to be working offshore, so can't do that from home, clearly, but there is an element of, I guess, office time to some extent for some of the people that you're dealing with. Do you think that giving those people more flexibility to work from home, for example, before they go offshore, or people offshore working with people who are at home or working flexibly, is that going to have an impact on performance, do you think?
Unclear at this stage. So what I would do is just communicate some thoughts I was having while Jared was speaking earlier. Jared and I co-authored a Q&A earlier this year around the connection between mindset and mood set, which to a large degree is servant leadership in my experience, and inspiring servant leadership at that. And never has that been more important than when facing a global pandemic, when facing something as scary as a once in a century type of event. And towards the end of that Q&A article that Jared and I put together, I quite like alliteration and memorable acronyms. So in that case, we'd come up with the 3 T's, which are truth, one version of the truth, transparency, and trust. And those 3 T's are key to a positive mood set. And inspiring servant leaders are able to maintain those 3 T's in order to manage that positive mood set, no matter what the adversity. So the example that Jared gave, by the way, where trust was lost potentially, and respect was arguably lost for the rig manager or the leader from the workers, because they felt that an incident was downplayed or underreported or misinformed. And so the importance of one single version of the truth, a transparent way of dealing with that truth, will build up trust. And the metaphor that sprang into my mind while Jared was talking is, and Rachel, you'll appreciate this from a marketing perspective, bad news unfortunately travels at the speed of light. Good news is like trying to send a smoke signal across the Atlantic. And it's the same with trust. Trust takes a long time to build. It takes a long time to build, but it can be lost in an instant if we are not truthful and transparent with the workforce. And so that then brings me back to your question, Rachel, and what Jared was touching on, which is the current conversation, which is all about hybrid working. It's all about, as the vaccine program continues to be successfully rolled out in the UK, and as we have surveys and conversations about whether we should all co-locate again to collaborate, or whether we have a hybrid version of collaboration where some work at home, some work in the office, or some days of the week are in the office, whereas the rest are at home. I still feel that the 3 T's of mood still stand. So we talked about doing surveys with the workforce. So we need to share the feedback, be transparent about what people are saying, irrespective, as Jared says, of whether you own some commercial property in Aberdeen, which is arguably going to become a liability rather than an asset if people no longer want to work in the building. Your workforce will be loyal and will be respectful if you transparently show that actually no one really wants to come back to the office. They've quite enjoyed working from home, or the majority. And so leadership needs to decide what to do with that office space in Aberdeen. Those are the kind of tough decisions which engender loyalty and respect, and as a result, commitment and hard work from the team. Whereas if there's a sense that there's some truth being hidden or deceit going on, of course, that's when mistrust starts to evolve. And lots of research has shown that can be a downward spiral for the productivity of the organization. So managing mood has never been tougher because of the backdrop of the global pandemic of COVID and the uncertainty and anxiety around the future. I often refer to Nelson Mandela when it comes to mood, because for me, he was a master at using the magic of mood to perform miracles, ultimately, pull a very divided nation together. And the way he did that with the Rugby World Cup 95, which the Springboks went into in seeded ninth, and then ultimately won the tournament, was largely down to the Mandela mood set that Mandela created through his servant leadership. And Mandela said that servant leadership is about basically taking a back seat and allowing people to unlock their potential unless there's danger. If there's danger, a good servant leader moves to the front and leads from the front and faces the danger in a way that the team feels supported and led and inspired, and with an example, the right example to follow. So, if we relate to what happened in South Africa, the Rainbow Nation, as it emerged from a history of racism and division, through the first democratic election and the changes that Mandela was instrumental in making, that's an example of good leadership against adversity, which might be a salutary lesson to leaders facing the current emergence from COVID.
Yeah, so in, against this context then, when we are in a bit of a state of flux and there are various different, I guess, psychological mindsets out there just now. Some people are desperate for things to return to normal. Some people are a little bit wary of that. Jared, what advice would you give to a company then wanting to do something really quite simple but impactful on their human factors right now?
With regard to COVID and going back to the office, or just
yeah, in general, where we are in June 2021, which is a bit of a, it might be okay, people are supposed to be optimistic, but then don't quite want to be optimistic in case something goes wrong again. How does that affect human factors? And is there something that, if a company was thinking, we just don't know how to get our team together, cohesive, as you were saying, Tim, having that sort of really pulling together in one direction. What can they do to bring everybody back into that mindset?
Well, Tim mentioned having a survey. You've got to speak to people and you've got to understand where they're coming from, because people's childcare, people's individual circumstances have changed. And also, if we're going through a situation now where we're getting lots of new people and people are moving and we're expanding, then I think it's vitally important that we do get back to the office for new people. What we find is that when it comes to trust, actually, if you've got an established trust with someone, if you've got an established relationship, then remote working is fine. It's great. But you really can't beat, if you've got somebody that you're mentoring and someone that you're trying to bring into the fold, you can't actually beat seeing that person face to face. They can read your micro expressions, they can read your body language a lot easier, and it just it feels better in the room. So that would be my advice. Certainly if you've got new people, if you've got people you're developing, then you want to get back to helping them in person. And some things are just easier to show when you're in person. You can do screenshots and we can do presentations, but sometimes if you're going to show someone how to change a chain on a bicycle, then you probably want to be right there with them. It's that type of thing. With regard to human factors in general, I think that and if we talk about kind of performance and safety, I think the last year, if we're honest, everybody's focus has been getting through the pandemic. It's been, okay, how do we keep going when we're possibly losing customers? It's difficult to get supplies, and the supplies is probably something that's going to continue to be difficult post-Brexit, post-COVID, and with the different issues that we're facing. But how do we actually turn our focus now back to getting better? So you need to start having those conversations. How do we do this? Who do we need to speak to? Who in our network can help us? Tim, that's probably something that you've been gearing up and getting ready to do.
We've been speaking to organizations about helping them adjust their performance climate to the prevailing circumstances, which include many organizations embracing the new hybrid mindset. And interestingly, we've just touched on Brexit and COVID. Of course, we've also had the digital and the energy transition, just to throw into the mix. All of these massive changes that are affecting all of us. So in the context of massive change, there are many things to think about, not least organizational development and constructive collaboration. So it's a really interesting time to be involved in coaching and consulting and helping leaders to navigate these uncharted waters in a successful way, to get the best from the virtual environment we've been forced into and overlay that with what we know worked well in the more traditional environment that we had pre-COVID, and try and merge those together for the benefit of our ongoing forward improvement and progress.
Talking of ongoing activity, and you mentioned this just at the beginning there, Tim, about the energy transition, which is, I mean, the two words are on everybody's lips in this industry, certainly, whether that's how they portray how the company itself is managing the energy transition or how they help their clients manage the energy transition. Jared, from the human factors perspective, what do you think is the greatest opportunity for, you know, emerging renewables energies?
I think the greatest opportunity is to learn from the industries that are already established. We don't need to necessarily invent the wheel. Every industry is slightly different, but it's the same human factors that actually come into play that will disrupt operations and hurt people. If you look at aviation, that's the classic one that we look at, that, and military. In fact, most of the human factors, as they started, would have started back in, basically, you're talking about World War II, after World War I. And then we moved on, and occupational psychology has its roots, and human factors has its roots in there. But if we look at things like nuclear, aviation, these guys are, you know, decades and decades ahead. If we look at healthcare over the last 20 years has come on immeasurably. And then even oil and gas, because oil and gas, to be fair, when it comes to human factors, I have a paper somewhere which talks about human factors and the importance of human factors in oil and gas, and it's 30 years old. It's from 1990, and it's only really now that we are pushing human factors, what I would call kind of more traditional human factors, with considering things like crew resource management, that we are from aviation and how we interact as teams, that we're bringing that stuff into oil and gas. But when it actually comes down to risk assessments and procedural discipline, then we have in oil and gas a really strong history that we can, basically a legacy that we can pass on to the emerging industries. So I would say, really, for the emerging industries, that they need to look to the industries that they can learn from, and to probably tap into the right people. It can be tempting to have a senior safety manager and assign them as your human factors expert. I wouldn't advise people to do that in general. I think if you are going to go down that road, then you should probably have someone, an expert on hand, that works with your organization to advise them and to make sure that they're aligned with current thinking and best thinking. I think we could do better with that in oil and gas, and I'm pretty sure that that's going to be a learning for renewables and emerging technologies. So if you were going to, if you were a pilot, you would do what we would call crew resource management training. So crew resource management training is almost thinking of non-technical skills. So you're not just learning how to be a pilot and how to fly a plane, you're learning how to interact with other people. You'll be taught about situation awareness, about memory, about decision making, and the kind of the psychology of human factors. You don't necessarily need to be an expert or a master, but you'll understand the fundamentals, and that has an impact in the way that you make decisions, and the way that you interact with other people. If we look at our drill teams, then lots of times our drill teams so kind of like our assistant drillers, our drillers and our tool pushers would be expected to go away and to learn about this stuff as part of their well control training. That's a few people on a rig at any one time, and there's any number of people who can be hurt or can disrupt operations because of human factors. We just really don't give that education widely enough. We don't actually embed those human factors, as in my mind, as we should. I have no idea why we don't have the crane operators and the chefs have some fundamental human factors training. Because there can be a fire in the galley that can be a major accident hazard. We don't really do it widely enough.
So that sounds to me like there's kind of maybe just a bit of an assumption that people can deal with the situations that day-to-day working life will throw at them, and maybe that's too much of an assumption. But do you think that kind of holds people back from considering human factors? I think, well, that's maybe just a bit of an unnecessary nice to have. Yes,
there you go. I think people don't understand what it is. If you don't understand it, you've never been exposed to it, then really, how can you introduce it? You're not going to see its importance. But if you understand it and you think, okay, well, this isn't too difficult, it's we can roll this out practically. There isn't really a good excuse for not rolling it out. And the industry is getting better. There is the Human Performance in Oil and Gas body, which is kind of non-profit, which has some really good resources, and I would advise anybody who's watching or listening to go and check that out. But we just really need to do more. We've got human factors that we know about, and what we actually do is we really are. We pitch human factors at safety professionals. We pitch human factors at designers. Mm-hmm. And then, so we try and design human factors in, and Tim, you've probably done HazOps and hazards, and we try and make a place as safe as it can be, or a platform or an oil rig, and satisfy a safety case. But the people who then work day in and day out have very little exposure to the factors and the human factors and the concepts of human factors and the things that will keep them safe. So we need to do more than that, and we can easily use tools. We give people tools. We give them JSAs, job safety analysis, before they do their work, and the JSA a lot of the time will talk about an energy wheel or a hazard wheel. We'll talk about things routinely such as electricity, gravity, motion, radiation, and any number of things. But what we don't really do to the same extent is we don't talk about distraction, we don't talk about multitasking, we don't talk about fatigue, we don't talk about difficulties hearing and seeing in what is a dynamic and often difficult environment. So we actually we don't really build in human factors using the tools that we can as we should. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Yeah, it does. And I guess that building in those tools, I know that a lot of what Tim and his team does is coaching of a team, and it's that that sort of education side of things, I guess, in a way. How do you instill the human factor side of things? Is that through coaching as well as the tools? That's where it needs to be. That's exactly where it needs to be. Previously, when I've helped people with a subset of human factors, and we're talking behavioral safety, I'll go out and I'll work with teams so they do what I would call a quality toolbox talk. So they have quality safety meetings, and you actually help them use the tools that they have so they get better at using those tools. You can't just give someone a pro forma and say, well, there you go, and then that's it. It's just not going to work. So I think coaching is going to be hugely important in integrating human factors. And I would say that I would use the words properly integrating, because at the moment, I think what we do is we inherit human factors. As I say, you know, we try and design it in, and then we forget all about it until something goes wrong, and then we get the safety officer to come out, do a root cause analysis, and he's got a handful of human factors that he or she will look at. That's not the way to go. But if we've got tools, so we talk about education. First of all, we need to educate people what human factors is. But I like to think of something with human factors as kind of like steer. So, okay, you go and you survey, what's the human factors climate? What does it look like? Target, what do you actually want to do? But then the two bit that you've got, educate and embed, and that's where coaching really comes into its own, because you need to educate people. Okay, what are the things that are going to cause mishaps or harm? So yeah, we've touched about having, you know, are your tools in the right place at the right time? Have there been any unexpected changes? Is there any misdirection or distraction? So we've got all these things that we can talk about, but there needs to be a bit of education about those so people understand what they are and they can recognize them. But then when you're using the tools, again, it's you know, it's just classic coaching. If you wanted to get a personal fitness trainer, then you really need someone who's going to say, okay, what is it you want? Okay, how are we going to do this? You know, what works for you? And then actually does that observation and feedback and just helps you along until it becomes habit. So habit's a nice word for culture. It's the things that you repeatedly do that either take you to success or they'll take you further away from it. But I don't really believe that anybody is going to be able to implement a strong human factors culture, certainly in a good time frame over the next year or two, without the use of you know, strongly either internal coaches, and that can be a tricky thing, getting people who've got the focus, the time and the knowledge to be able to do that, or external coaches who can come with, they've got that time, they've got that knowledge, and you know, their whole job is to keep that focus and to help you along. So I'm passionate about the role of coaching in human factors.
I think external coaching is maybe more valuable, because I think, Tim, that's one of the reasons performance improvement at Exceed exists, because it can be helpful to have that person coming in as opposed to always being a colleague or a peer who comes in and helps the performance improvement campaign. Is the same true, Jared, from a human factors point of view? Do you think there is merit in it being a slight outsider? Or
I think that there's lots of merit in it being a slight outsider. The truth of modern day work is that people are busy. People are very busy, and it's difficult for them to find the time and the focus to actually, you know, supercharge what is going to be a cultural change. It's really cultural human factors that you're looking at, and someone doing that, you know, kind of out the corner of their eye in their spare time as a volunteer or being assigned, then that's a hard ask. It can be done, so you know, it can be done, but your best chance of success, in my opinion, is to have someone who is objective, is someone who's independent, someone who can actually speak with transparency and have a relationship of trust, because you'll find if you've got a good coach, that coach will also have, you know, a good business relationship with the coachee, whereby that person knows that the coach only wants what's best for them and will help them develop. Not everybody can do that, and not everybody knows. You know, for the same reason that supervisors often need leadership training, because not everybody's a natural leader. We have to help people along. Not everybody is a natural coach, but just from the point of view of time and energy, external coaches are hugely valuable.
Tim, going back to what Jared's just spoken about there, about the importance of coaching and potential external coaching, I know, say, that's kind of part of the performance improvement team's daily work. Have you seen the difference that it can make compared to, say, going in after there's been an internal performance improvement drive? What difference have you guys been able to make?
There is insufficient understanding about what human factors actually are. So if I just pick up on three, which Jared listed there, which were fantastic. So distraction, fatigue, and multitasking / single tasking. So those are three that we can all relate to in any environment. There are so often distractions, whether it's at home or work, you know, there are distractions, there's interference that takes place. Often we get a bad night's sleep, which leads to fatigue. Are we honest about that? No, typically we just get on with work without really acknowledging the impact that has. And it's well researched, the impact. And in fact, that's why, you know, you see on the motorway, those signs flash up, you know, fatigue can kill, take a break, or words to that effect. And then there's also research around, you know, the benefits of single tasking versus multitasking. But of course, we're all tempted to try and do a bunch of things at the same time, which leads to distraction. And if we're fatigued, can compound the risk of something going wrong. So just picking up on those three great examples that Jared gave, because I know there'll be people who will watch and listen to this podcast and for a while might be thinking, well, what actually are human factors? And while Jared was talking, I was thinking about the fact that the soft skills, our soft skills, are often the hardest to achieve because they are the intangibles. And so how are we going to bring in those known factors, which we know based on the post-accident investigations that Jared touched on, where an inspection, a follow-up team will go and look at what contributed to the accident and will list out those human factors. How are we closing the loop and making sure that what emerged from those investigations is now being implemented into governing documents such as JSAs or pre-planning checklists, and how are we helping our leaders and supervisors and really supporting them to take the time to have the honest conversations with their workforces about whether they are, you know, distracted, fatigued, or feeling pressured to multitask or to get the job done by a certain time, despite the risks involved. We touched on coaching as well, and I love the way Jared was talking about that, because humans, unfortunately, it is the human condition to look for the easy way, especially when fatigued. We'll look for the easy way to get something done, which is often a dangerous way. And having objective accountability partnership, which is what coaching is all about, it represents our conscience. It's basically our conscience as another person saying, hang on, pause, take a time out. Let's think about what we're about to do here. I know that you want to get to bed or you want to get to dinner, but you want to get this done. However, have we taken the time to consider all risk factors, including human factors here? And often if we haven't created the conditions through objective external expertise or accountability partnership where that trust has been built, as Jared talked about, and where a coach is seen as someone who's genuinely trying to help raise standards, improve safety, improve efficiency. If we have that, there's more likelihood that we will actually genuinely improve the conditions for everyone. One of the examples that I thought of while Jared was talking earlier was the Macondo incident, the Deepwater Horizon, which was dramatized in the film, as we all know. And there was some clear human factors that emerged from that incident investigation around complacency, around poor leadership, around making assumptions. I think this is where there is a big overlap between performance improvement coaching and human factors coaching, which is why I always find it fascinating to converse with Jared and to listen to his perspective on things. And I think the more we can do to help leaders and performance improvement practitioners or coaches to understand the importance of human factors, the more we can do there, the better for all industries, actually. So it's been a great conversation.
Well, thank you both so much. I can't believe there would be a single person listening to this who wouldn't be fascinated by what you're talking about, because it applies to every single one of us, and as you said, Tim, to every single industry, and I guess in many cases to our personal lives as well. We carry those lessons into our everyday lives. So thank you both. For those of you listening who would like to find out more from either Tim or Jared, or for indeed both of them, then their contact details will be coming up at the end of this podcast. Equally, you can check out the Exceed website, and you will be able to listen to this podcast for some time to come, whether it's on the Exceed website, whether it's on the Exceed YouTube channel, or there is an audio version only on SoundCloud. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.